Our camera is
And co-host.
my stream is fine.
Okay, I cannot show the screen.
Yeah. Security got this.
Participants and something.
Okay, thank you.
Defend there.
It is coming into.
Oops. Okay.
Oh, you people are not stream in the screen. YouTube.
It's just rain.
Yeah.
You know, I bought the speaker.
No, it is
What
shared,
is
the
this?
first one is like that.
Okay, so it seems to work. Shall I begin or?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you again. Thank you again for having invited me, and in particular, thank you to Professor Kumada Sadikari. Also, thank you for being there. Since it's almost the end of the week and certainly the end of the day, I mean, at least for conferences, I'm going to be less technical this time and maybe a little bit shorter. I'm not sure yet. Okay, the title I chose is there is no relationship between music and mathematics, but of course the title is somehow provoking, and we are going to see a little bit what I'm thinking about these kind of things. Okay, so as you guess, the talk is going to be split into two parts. First part is there is no relationship between music and mathematics, and the second part is but. Okay, so the first part, it happens that we can hear a lot of cliches, so to say, about the mathematics and about music and about the links, possible links between both. First cliche claims that music and mathematics are deeply linked, or even I have heard people think, oh, you know, it's the same thing, which of course I don't really believe in, and people immediately cite Pythagoras, Leibniz, and so on and so forth. Another cliche is to say that mathematicians are musicians. Nobody knows what exactly people say by saying that. Of course, this sentence is most often heard from mathematicians than by musicians. And another cliche is about what some people call mathematical beauty. I put quotes around beauty, and I'll tell you later what I think about this. Okay, so the first cliche claims that music and mathematics are deeply linked, or as I said, some people say this is the same thing. And when I say there is no relationship between mathematics and music, immediately someone in the audience, oh, come on, what were the scales? And I answer immediately, oh, by the way, you think music is just scales? Of course, you have scales, you have rhythm, you have symmetries, and so on and so forth, but this is a very small part of music. Because if you think this is important, so you also should mention metallurgy to make wind instruments, lutherie for violin making, acoustics, semiconductors, and so on and so forth. Why just mathematics? In other words, to me at least, mathematics is somehow just a tool and nothing more. And when I say are a tool, no, not even. They can be a tool, in my opinion, again. Now, the second cliche is mathematicians are musicians. Of course, people don't define what a mathematician is, and they don't define either what a musician is. So what are mathematicians? Are there people who teach math, who are researchers in math, who love math? We play Sudoku as experts, or they keep repeating for anything, oh yeah, this is logical, this is mathematics. What are musicians? Are there people who compose music, who teach music, who are researchers in musicology, who play in an orchestra, who play some music instrument, well or not that well, who have some opera subscription, or keep repeating, oh, I really need to listen to music day and night. Okay. Whoops, sorry about that. In particular, a love of music, and by the way, which music, is maybe linked to social professional category, and the same for love of math. And it might well be that it's the same professional category that claims, I don't know that love, but that claim to love music, respectively mathematics. I mean, we could make some sort of social professional criticism by saying, yeah, this is a kind of bourgeoisie for whom it's very snobbish to say, you know, I love music, I love mathematics, and they don't understand or love music, neither music nor mathematics. Maybe. There could be the link, actually. It could be a link, the same kind of people claiming that they love one and the other, and one and the other are the same. Again, claiming, not really loving. Just an anecdote on this subject. Years and years ago, probably the end of the 70s or the beginning of the 80s, I was in Bordeaux, and once I was discussing with a colleague. She was a geologist, and actually her father was a mathematician, if I remember well. And I said, you know, mathematicians are boring because they always say, oh, you know, mathematicians are musicians. And she said, oh, really? You know, by us, it's different. We say geologists are musicians. Okay, now what about what people call the mathematical beauty? Okay, I claim that there are two kinds of beauty, so to say. Actually, this cliche about mathematical beauty is more difficult to explain. I mean, my position is more difficult to explain. I said there are two kinds of beauty, namely the beauty in the arts on one side versus something in mathematics which I would call aesthetics. And in particular, one essentially goes to the heart or the gut, and the other one goes to the brain. Music, painting, and so on and so forth in the heart, and mathematics possibly in the brain. If I'm not convincing yet, I would say something more. I mean, if you want to understand, I mean, to see what people call beauty, what I call aesthetics in mathematics, you have to know things in advance, to have a preliminary corpus, to have the knowledge of a preliminary corpus. If you see a proof of a deep theorem, I mean, if you are just a regular person in the street, on the street, you are not going to understand it. But if you're a regular person, you may have some sort of reaction, emotional reaction in front of a piece of art or a piece of music. Okay, so there's certainly a difference. And it explains what I use the word brain. You have to know things in advance. Of course, in art also you may have to know, but you can also have a sort of brute of pure emotion without knowing anything about the culture. For example, you can be really moved by a piece of art, say African statue, and you don't know anything to African art, and then you have a fantastic feeling, fantastic emotion, and you don't understand what this is, and you don't make a construction, abstract intellectual construction to know that. Same for music, but for math, I'm not sure. And so this opens the way to the question of emotion. For example, there is a citation by Christian Boltanski where he say, I think there seem to be two reasons for art: to give emotions and to ask questions. It was a paper in the newspaper Libération in 2021. And I also found something in the same spirit in this paper by Naga, Bassoub, Sanarab, Banerjee, and Gosp. This is a paper actually appeared in Journal of Physics, Physical Art, Statistical Mechanics and Investigations, where this music is often considered as the language of emotions. And they are interested in deep learning and somehow to classify or to quantify emotions in Indian classical music. Tom Johnson, who is an American composer living in France, I'm going to mention later on, said something that you can just find there in front of you, where he says that he wants to react again a sort of romantic, expressionistic musical past, and he wants to be, say, somehow objective and to avoid manipulating the emotions. I mean, there is even a citation by him where he said, my music, at least some parts of his music, should not raise any emotion. And there's a paper by Laurence Maillard-Tessier and myself where we ask the question whether emotion might well be just an irreducible difference between math and music. And this is the source. More precisely, it seems to be a difference between emotion and something which is just sensation of feeling. So, for example, between romantic music, between some way of listening to Baroque music. I mean, you can listen to Baroque music just by being interested in, oh yeah, there's palindrome and there's such structure and so on and so forth, and you probably miss a large part of it. And you cannot, usually you cannot do that with romantic music. And that's precisely what Tom Johnson says. He makes a difference between what he called what we call the purely mathematical music and what he calls autobiographical, self-biographical music, music that describes yourself somehow. It's also selfish music, just where you are the center of the composer is the center of the composition. And in particular, here's a question that you may ask yourself: have you already wept while listening to mathematical proof? I mean, if you listen to a piece of music, you can be really deeply feel a deep emotion and maybe weep, cry. And did that ever happen to you when listening to mathematical proof? Good. Of course, one should be careful. I have not said that music was only emotion. I mean, there is a part of emotion, but of course there are other things. And in particular, I have a citation by Emmanuel Kalev. He is a graduate of the École Polytechnique, so typically a scientist, a mathematician. And at some point, he moved to music completely, and is now a conductor in Paris, orchestra conductor. And he says that it's very romantic to think that music is just sensation, feeling, but it's not honest. one must make research, one must search, one must have intellectual work and listening a lot to, for example, to lead an orchestra. I mean, you cannot just come and say, okay, this is a great emotion and I don't need to work. So that's not the case. And this is a caveat I wanted to say. I've not said that music was unemotional. Okay. I have another anecdote on this subject. Many years ago, I was discussing with a friend of mine. She's a mathematician and she plays saxophone. And she plays, at that time, she plays in particular jazz music. And she said, you know, when I'm drunk, my improvisations are much better. I said, no. When you are drunk, you are more indulgent to yourself. You don't really, you are not really able to judge yourself. So you are self-indulgent, so to say. It's not to be drunk makes your improvisation better. Certainly not, in my opinion, as usual. Okay, and remember, I said there is no relation. Oops, what happens? Yeah, there is no relation between music and mathematics. But so the second part is but, and my thesis is it's possible to say at the same time there is no relation between music and mathematics, and simultaneously at the same time to provide composers with mathematical tools. At the same time, it's just a private joke. It's a favorite sentence of our president, who all the time says something and the precise contrary, and of course it does nothing. Neither the one thing nor the contrary, but it's all at the same time. Okay, and in particular, I'm going to say a few words on four composers with whom I have more or less worked. And first is André Mouret, the second one is Marcel Premier, the third is Tom Johnson, and the last one of this list, at least, is Christopher Adler. Okay, let me begin with André Mouret. I didn't find a picture of him on the web. When I met him, he was trying to find a way of transforming a sound, let's say the sound of a piano, in the sound of a flute, in a sort of continuous way. And he told me, are you able to give me such a tool? I said, no, I am not. You know, I'm a mathematician, as they say. So it means that I don't know anything in the subject. And we discussed and discussed and discussed. And finally, it came to my mind that this does exist, at least for drawings. It's called morphing. You have certainly seen lots and lots of pictures where a picture transforms continuously and slowly from one thing to another one in a purely automatic way. And of course, you can imagine of doing the same thing with music, sort of metamorphosis, morphing, it's called morphosis. Okay, he was doing also something interesting, was fractional tempi, or fractional time. You know, in music usually here, the pieces are with like 2 times or 3 times or 4 times for tempi, I don't know the word, precise word, for beats maybe. And you want to do something with a fraction, for example, 3.5 or 3.28 times. So some sort of irregular measure, so to say. And he also, okay, made a lot of things, and we wrote a paper together at some point, years and years ago, 1988, if I'm not mistaken, which was called Non-Hierarchic Freedom, Liberties, Finite Automata, Matrix Fields. And one of the ideas behind it was essentially blah, blah, as far as I remember. I mean, there were no real mathematics in it, but there was already this idea, which is trivial somehow, which I mentioned already yesterday or the day before, I forgot, that, you know, you have the order, the dull order of, for example, the fireman vehicles in France, which is periodic and without interest at all. And on the other side, you have the total chaos, the randomness, the noise near a highway, or the noise in an overcrowded place, where there is nothing interesting and it's pure disorder. And so music should be somewhere in between, which is essentially trivial to say, possibly a little bit more towards the order than toward the chaos, I hope. Okay, that's it with André. The second one is Marcel Premier, who died a few years ago. Marcel Premier created the class of electroacoustic music in Marseille, in the Conservatoire de Marseille. And he was very much interested in mathematical models, but just as a, how to say, not as a strict way of composing, but just as something that gives you ideas and so on and so forth. And in particular, he created the laboratory of music and computer science, E for informatics, in Marseille. And at this time, it was one of the 10 laboratories in France that got subvention, that got grants from the Ministry of Culture. There was the IRCAM, of course, the IRCAM in Paris, very well known, and 10 other such, let's say, institutes in France. And in Marseille, he was the head of one of those. And at some point, there was a group which I belonged to, which was called OC. And OC was a joke somehow, because it was both order and chaos, OC, order and chaos. And also, you know, in the old times, France, both languages was essentially divided into two parts. In north, the language was langue d'oil, O-I-L, and in the south it was Languedoc, O-C. So north and south, and of course Marseille was Languedoc. And there was a group whose leading people were Marcel Premier himself and Jacques Mandelbrot. Jacques Mandelbrot is a physicist and a painter, and he's a cousin of Benoît Mandelbrot, and is the son of Solem Mandelbrot. Okay, and when discussing together, we were discussing in particular this notion of OC, order and chaos, and at some point, somebody proposed to look at the model of the Tower of Hanoi. Okay, I mentioned it yesterday, or the day before, maybe both, I forgot. And Marcel Premier was very interested in this, but curiously enough, he was not interested in putting the whole tower you started from to another peg, but he was interested in the way, in the ways of moving things, in particular what is called the divine rule or gold rule or whatever, which is you don't have the right of putting a disk on a smaller one. You can put it only on a larger one, not necessarily the consecutive one, but just any larger one. And so he used this to compose church music, messe pour orgue à l'usage des paroisses. Paroisse is parish. So he made a messe for organ using the Hanoi Tower, the moves of the disc in the Hanoi Tower. And yeah, this is not easy to see. A, B, C, and so on are the moves. Remember, there were 6 letters for the possible moves. No, sorry, A, B, C are the towers here. And T1, T2, and so on are the 6 possible moves. And so it was the beginning, I mean, the introduction, the meditation, so on and so forth, technical terms used in churches. And it was played in Marseille at some point. And here is an extract of the score. And of course, if you listen to it, which again, I cannot do here because when I tried already other times to let people listen to music by Visio, it doesn't work. I mean, it makes a very bad sound and it's okay. Anyway, maybe you can have an idea by looking at the score. Maybe we don't really see where the Hanoi Tower is, even if we use this. And if we listen to it, we have an impression of something rotating, which is not exact, but okay, it has to do with the Hanoi Tower. But what I think is somehow I don't care. I mean, if people use mathematics for music, for paintings, or even for literature, like the Oulipo, you know, they have rules and so on. I don't want to know the rules. I mean, maybe later on when I know the piece and so on and so forth, I can be interested in looking at it and knowing the rule. But I don't need, it's even bad to know the rule in advance. It's like going to the movies and reading details about the movie before criticism, before, no, just maybe after, not before. Okay, that's it for Marcel Premier, if I'm not mistaken. And the next composer who's worked more or less is Tom Johnson. Okay, Tom Johnson is an American composer, but he lives in Paris. I think he lives in France since 1980 something, 83. Yeah, 83. And as I said, he is not interested. He is against emotion in his music up to some point. I mean, for majority of his pieces, and he's minimalist. And that means again that he takes some sort of algorithm. And once you have the algorithm, you have to play the algorithm. You don't have the right to change something there and something there. Maybe you can change all the parameters or change the algorithm, but once you have it, this is a piece of music. Okay, score equal algorithm plus parameters. How did I meet him? It was in the maybe the end of the 80s or beginning of 90s. I forgot. No, maybe the end of the 80s. He excuse me. He was composing some pieces that were called formulas for string chords. What he called these formulas. He wanted to know two things. First of all, he wanted to know whether his algorithm was already known or used by mathematicians or computer scientists or whomever. And he said he could not finish some of the pieces because his algorithm was not defined precisely enough for him to finish the pieces. So he first went to a different person, then he went to Michel Waldschmidt. Michel Waldschmidt looked at the work and said, for me, it has to do with automata. You could go and see Jean-Paul Allouche. So I met at that time Tom Johnson. I looked for finite automata, and of course, since I looked for finite automata, I found finite. And it happens that pieces have to do with maybe not automatic sequences, but at least morphisms. And we had a paper together. I was very proud of that. Finite automata and morphism in assisted musical composition. Okay, and it was a premiere of this string quartet, and he told me after the premiere that it was very good, but there was a default. The problem to his eyes that he never spoke with the musicians about was that there were real people playing and they put emotion, though they shouldn't have put any emotion. That maybe it would have been better to have a purely automatic device playing this string quartet. The second thing we did together is a Pascal Triangle module 7. It was a radio program in the 90s, 1995. I'm speaking a little bit about it later on. And so on. Okay, so formulas for string quartet is one of the formulas. If you look carefully at it, you can see, for example, looking at two violins. I'm not sure it's easy to look at. Maybe it's a little bit small. But if you look at the two violins, you see that the second one is the same essentially as the first one, but slower. First one does something, and the second one, something like this, and you could see something of the same kind with the other two voices. So you see this sort of self-similarity, and you understand that there is a morphism behind. Remember the arrows for the two more sequence for the plus and minus, where we had each note gave an arrow, and then every second tone was the same as, okay, it's something of the same kind, except there would be three arrows there, and from bottom to top and not from top to bottom. But okay, that was one of the formulas. Here is another one, same kind of thing. Maybe, okay, we cannot really see because it's too small on one hand, and also it's not quite clear to understand. It's a little bit better if we listen to it. Okay, now the Pascal Triangle. It was an interesting radio program by the late René Farabee, and Tom Johnson and René Farabee were presenting this piece by Tom Johnson. What he did was following: you take the Pascal Triangle, reduce it mod 7. Okay, so you see 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 3, 3, 1, and so on and so forth. And each of these values, 0 up to 6, you can associate it with a note. So A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. And then you play line by line, automatically if possible. You stop a little bit after each line. You stop a little bit more after after 7 lines, after 4 lines, and so on and so forth. And you listen to what you get. Again, I'm not going to let you listen to that. Okay, so about this discussion between Tom and René, and Tom was commenting the patterns that were occurring from time to time, and I was at some points asked questions about some mathematical property of this. Of this triangle. And there was Bernadette Sachet was playing 2 roles. She was on one side a mother, and on the other side a kid. And the mother said to the kid something like, "Oh, come on, you are still listening to music." "No, Mom, it's not music. Come on, it's music." No, it's not music. It's mathematics," and so on and so forth. This was quite fun and interesting. I hope for the audience of this radio program. Okay, so this is what is obtained. Mod 7, and so on and so forth. Okay, just minimalist music. And then I asked Tom, there is a property of the Pascal Triangle in 2 dimensions that we have mentioned yesterday, or the day before, saying that if you take the Pascal Triangle and reduce it mod D, for some integer D, it behaves differently if D is a prime power or if D is not a prime power. Remember, if D is equal to P to some power, then the thing is P automatic. And if it's D equals 6, for example, which is not a prime power, then the Pascal Triangle is not K automatic for any K. So yeah, okay, interesting. Let's go and see what happens mod 6. So we looked at it mod 6, and it was absolutely not interesting. I said, okay, what about 8? So he had to concoct a scale of 8 notes inside an octave. He did that automatically, and then he played the thing. And curiously enough, there was a sort of rhythm built in that occurred, completely unexpected. He said, okay, so I add a rhythm. Again, automatically, there is something giving the tempo. And curiously enough, again, we obtained something, he obtained something sort of jazzy. A sort of something jazzy playing. Okay, but that's it for mod 8. And that's it for Pascal Triangle. And for Tom Johnson, I wanted to say something else, I forgot. No, possibly. Yeah, no, that was the poster of the program. Okay, the next composer is Christopher Adler, and Christopher Adler lives in California. We sort of worked together, but we never met. I mean, it was just by Visio, whatever, and computers and emails. And we met in a curious way. He knew Tom Johnson. And so he wants to write to Tom Johnson the following letter. Okay. So he was, at some point, he was working with palindromes that were also similar. And he used them in 2 pieces. One is Signals Intelligence, and the other one was 11 sequences for Tom Johnson. And at that point, he had a construction related to these palindromes. It was a self-similar sequence, which is also its own retrograde inversion, which means you go the other way around, and maybe you have a symmetry simultaneously. And he wrote a code to prove that, but it was not used. This idea was not used. And he was at that moment working on a piece for 2 pianos based on this sequence. Okay, so he told a little bit about the math behind, I mean, what he was looking for, what he was working on. And it happened, curiously enough, that his self-similar sequences were related to an old paper of mine, in 83-84, Suite infinie à répétition bornée, bounded repetition infinite sequences, that appeared in the Séminaire de théorie des nombres in Bordeaux. And okay, maybe we are doing a little bit of mathematics, not too much. For today, as I say, we are possibly a little bit tired. Okay, this is it. We take the integers between 1 and 2 times capital L. Capital L is fixed, that's an integer. And we define this permutation. 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, L goes to 2L, and then the following one goes to the odd numbers, 1, 3, 2, and -1. Okay. So it's essentially doubling mod 2 and plus 1, as you can see. Okay, so for example, L goes to the 2L. Okay, so L plus 1, if you multiply by 2, it gives you 2L plus 2, which mod 2L plus 1 is 1. Okay, this is doubling mod 2L plus 1, or if you prefer, if J is between 1 and L, you double J, and if not, I mean, if you have sigma of L plus J, where J is between 1 and L, you take 2 times J minus 1. Okay, this is a permutation, why not? And for example, the question is, you look at it and you ask, how many cycles does it have when you decompose it as a product of cycles? Or if you prefer, if you look at the orbits when you iterate the sigma L, how many orbits do you get, you obtain? Okay, and the result is you have a summation for all divisors except one of 2L plus 1. L is the parameter above, of a fraction, phi of d. Phi is the Euler, totient Euler function, and divided by the order of 2 mod d. Remember, d divides 2L plus 1, so is odd. So there is an order. This is at least positive integer k, for which 2 to the k is congruent to 1 mod d. Okay, so this is the formula. And it was on the step, one of the steps in the work we did together, Christopher Adler and myself. Yeah. It happens that this permutation has to do with some kind of card shuffling. Curiously enough, also with juggling. If you look at the sequences when you juggle, which I'm totally unable to do, this sequence can occur, can appear. And of course, we wrote a paper together that was published in the Journal of Mathematics and the Arts. Again, very proud of that. Finite self-similar sequences, permutation cycles, and music composition, where we explore the sequences that Christopher was interested in, including this result, of course, which is just one of the steps. By the way, it's possible to look at more general thing that's multiplying by 2. And there's a paper by Jeff Scheidt and others, an old paper also working on that. I forgot what he did precisely. And here is the beginning of the story of the first part of the work for 2 pianos by Christopher Adler, inspired by these permutation. Okay, so I'm not sure it's quite clear where the permutations occur exactly, but who cares? I mean, it was used. This idea was used there, and okay, it gave a piece that was played and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that's another thing I did not say. I mean, if a composer wants to use mathematics or whatever, physics or theology or whatever, to do music, okay, he or she is a composer. I have nothing to say. The only thing I can do is, okay, if you want tools that I know more or less, I can help you to use these tools, but I'm not forbidding you to use the tools. I'm not imposing the tools. I mean, you do whatever you want. You are the composer. Of course, one could cite many other relevant papers. Some of them claim that music is mathematics. I hope there are not that many. Some others just use mathematics to make music. And I would like to insist on only one of them. Years ago, in the time of Marseille and Marcel Premier, and so on and so forth, this paper by Bernard Bell, and the title is Ragas, conceptual and experimental approaches. It was a talk given at this conference, and I think this is a part of his doctoral thesis at this time. Okay, certainly the word raga is not unknown to you, and what Bernard Bell did, I think his wife was from India, or he lived in India at some point. Anyway, so he was interested in ragas that are, I'm probably not saying exactly what they are, some sort of musical fragment in the sort of classical linear music, and there are different kinds of ragas. And the idea of Bernard Bell was, okay, I take the corpus of ragas I know, or I ask experts about that, and I try to make a way of generating these ragas automatically. It was well before the artificial intelligence, of course. And his idea was to use what is called formal grammars that you can see somehow as a sort of generalization of finite automata, or more precisely, finite automata gives something that is a particular case of formal grammars anyway. And he concocted this model. He makes this model better and better by discussing with experts and so on and so forth. And when his model was essentially maybe not finished, but at least to a reasonable point, he went to masters, to experts, to people knowing everything and playing everything with ragas, and say, okay, look, I have a system that generates automatically some sort of different ragas. Okay, and they go, okay, we want to listen to that. And they play one, yeah, this is well known. This is from, okay, this one, well, no, it's not interesting at all. I mean, well, what do you play this? Oh, this one, we know it, and so on and so forth. At some point, oh, that one, this is a new one. We've never heard it before. And so the formal system could generate well-known raga, also something completely without interest, and by exception, one or maybe two or maybe a small number raga that were not known by experts. So at this time, he explained me these different things, but I must admit I forgot a little bit the story. As a conclusion, I have several things to say. First of all, when people speak of mathematics music, usually, at least often, what they have in mind is musicology, and mathematics, which means you take a musical piece and you try to explain it afterwards, a posteriori, by using mathematical tools. You don't want to know, you don't know what the composer has in mind. You just want to interpret it afterwards and say, okay, I found a model. Maybe it is, or maybe it is not what the composer had in mind, but at least I can explain part of the model, part of the piece. And I'm just giving one reference by Florence Levé, Gianluca Kamiki, and myself, where we used the inconstancy of music in Journal of Mathematical Music. Inconstancy is a way of measure. I could explain what it is, or maybe, okay. No, okay, maybe not. This is a way of, you take a curve on the plane and you want to see how much disorder is a curve. And you have different ways of doing it. For example, you count the total length of the curve and you divide by one or twice the perimeter of the convex hull. And so you guess that if the curve is sort of very smooth, sort of linear, then you get this quantity is very small, but if the curve does many complicated things, it is not. And there is a nice theorem from years and years and years and years ago, from centuries ago maybe, that says that this quantity can be measured in another way. You take a random straight line, you count how many intersections it has with the curve, and the average of number of intersections gives you this quantity, which is the length divided by twice the perimeter of the convex hull. Okay, now if you call this the inconstancy of the curve, and now you can try to apply this to music. You take your musical theme, like a curve, so to say, I mean, broken line, and then you slide a window on it, and you see how much it changes in terms of this kind of complexity, and it may give you some view about the complexity. Maybe you can compare. That was our hope. It's not completely fulfilled, but that was our hope. You compare different pieces of the same composer, or different composers at the same time, or something like this. And okay, of course, there is danger behind. The danger is to find things that the composer did not put in. And I will give a few anecdotes on this subject. The first one is a piece by Ligeti. A friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, Robert Pascal, he was a mathematician. And at some point he said, okay, I want to go to music. Of course, he made a lot of music when he was younger. And he completely stopped with math. And I think he was playing violin, and he was also composing, and probably being a professor at the Conservatoire de Lyon or something like this. And I have lost him at some point, and we met many years later in Lyon. By the way, there was a conference which was speaking about a little bit of music, a little bit of mathematics, and whatever. And one of the speakers was a famous composer, Ligeti, Giorgio Ligeti. And Robert Pascal gave a talk before. He gave a talk at some point where he was explaining a piece of Ligeti, where saying, you know, if I count the ratio between this and that, but not, and so on and so forth. Finally, I found the golden ratio. Okay, I don't enter into details. Maybe we are going to see that later on. And Robert Pascal continued, it could be just by chance or random, but given that Ligeti was blah, blah, and has worked with blah, blah, and so on and so forth, I think he wanted to put the golden ratio hidden in this piece. And Ligeti was in the audience, and he was giving his next talk after Robert Pascal. So Ligeti said, okay, I'm going to answer after that, a little bit later. And so he gave his talk. From time to time, he said, no, I don't forget, I have to answer what he said. And at the very end of his talk, he said, okay, look, what you said is very interesting, but I must say I've never put that into my piece. Maybe it came by chance, maybe it has nothing to do. I'm glad that you found it, but it's completely not something that I did myself, that I wanted to do, at least. Two other anecdotes is, one is about Egyptian pyramids, and the other one is about numerology. About pyramids, at some point, he was very in to interpret things coming from the pyramids as mathematics. You know, if you divide the length by the surface, by the area, by the height or whatever, then you get pi, you get the base of the Neperian logarithm, or and so on and so forth. And you see, Egyptian people knew a lot about science that we don't even know. And then some other people say, come on, we did the same experiment, with, you know, this sort of small houses, wooden houses in Paris where people sell newspapers, some sort of cabana or, anyway. And we took the dimensions of this, very modern things, and we took the length, the height, whatever, and we tried to combine them to make products, cushions, addition, sums, differences. And finally, if you play enough with these numbers, you can get whatever you want. And in particular, they got pi, they got whatever constant, Euler constant or whatever. So this is not really serious. Same story, sort of the same story with numerology. Numerology could be something very, very deep. I mean, like the Kabbalah, where each letter has value, and each word has values, the sum of values of its letters, and then you compare values. But of course, you should never say, "Oh, yeah, this is clear." No, this is just a way of looking differently. I mean, of making associations that possibly you would have never thought about before. And in particular, there is a downgraded version of that, which is numerology, or even numerolatry, and which is the same. I mean, you take your alphabet, each letter has a value, and then you add the values for a word, and then you compare words. And I wanted once to convince a friend of mine that this was not serious at all. I told her, okay, come on, take the letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, and so on. So for each of the letters, give me a random number, integer. So she said, okay, A is 19, B is 32, C is 4, and so on and so forth. Okay, I said, now I take the rules of numerology, and I take I compute the value of some important words. I mean, important, like God, man, woman, love, death, whatever. And then once you have these values, you play with that yourself. You try to do something. And if you try enough, and if you make many trials, necessarily you are going to find some relations. For example, something like, I don't know, man plus woman equal God plus love. Or, I mean, of course, you can find many things that are not necessarily important or interesting, because you took those numbers totally randomly. And I hoped that he was convinced. You know what she told me? You see, it works. Imagine that you had taken the real values, the right values. Okay. This is an extract of the discussion by, too complicated and probably too small to be read, by Robert Pascal about ligeti, which I mentioned yesterday. Yeah, what he said in particular, Robert Pascal thought that Ligeti put this golden ratio voluntarily because he is some sort of inspired in part by Bartok, and Bartok used the golden ratio and the sunflower and so on and so forth. Okay. And the notes say that this text was presented at a conference, and at the end of the conference, Ligeti said, okay, I was completely not consciously using this and didn't want to use that. It's purely, I don't know, chance or whatever. Okay. Yeah, do I have something else to say? Maybe I should stop there. Ah, no, something very interesting to finish with. Jean-Marc Lévy-Leblond is a physicist in France, and he also very interested in arts. And this is a citation by him about arts and science. And he says essentially that it seems that it's a sort of nostalgia, a naive nostalgia, to hope to put together again arts and sciences, and it's not a project, it's not even an utopic project. And he said something important. He finds this very good that this separation exists. He said, maybe it's myself, but I think that the interest of the difference between arts and sciences is that I can go from one to the other, and when I do that, really change my activity. If it were the same, there would be no interest for me to go into physics where I'm working now, to arts. I mean, if it boils down to do exactly the same, I don't care. I don't want that. I want those to be really completely and seriously different. Which I should say, which I share. I share this attitude. I think there is no interest in saying this is the same. And if it was the same, it would be sort of boring. At least my opinion. This is the title of this paper is La science n'est pas l'art, science is not art. But if you don't use the red letter, you read the science is art. So there's joke, sort of science is art and simultaneously it's not art. Okay, Nandi, thank you very much. I'm ready to answer a question if any.
From there.
Yeah.
Any question?
So, yeah. So I'm also interested in, is it loud enough?
Yeah, I mean, the sound is not good, but it's loud enough.
You can come in a little bit.
You can come here, you can come here.
I think the microphone is behind. No? Okay, anyway.
So, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Marcel asked me to ask some questions because I'm also interested in both topics, music and mathematics. And I actually started my first talk with an explanation of tone scales. So a continued fraction approximation. So an explanation of the 12 equal temperaments. But beyond that, I don't know much about the collection. So I have seen some statistical analysis of chord progressions, for example. Yeah, but yeah, your talk was more about yeah, the use of mathematics in contemporary music, so the other direction.
Yeah, not me, but in particular, yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, what made you interested in this topic? Are you also a musician?
Actually, I made a lot of. I mean, some music when I was younger. I think I began music before doing mathematics, but of course at a amateur level, not really expert. And at some point, I was at Bordeaux University, and I was really upset by people saying, "Oh, you know, math equal music, math equal music. We are musicians." You know, those you certainly know this kind of mathematicians, and okay, it's a little bit boring. So I developed a sort of counter something against that. Yeah, and it happens that I met, as I said, a few composers, and all were interested in math. And again, if they want to use the math as tools, they are perfectly welcome. And I'm just considering at this point myself as a provider of tools if they want me to explain tools. So I don't forbid them to use math. I just say, don't claim that math equal music. I mean, a real equal, I mean, identical to like those ex-colleagues did.
Yeah, but this composer, which you mentioned several times, Tom Johnson. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he seems to use mathematics or algorithms in a quite strict way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So is that going through the whole piece using an algorithm, or a mix?
Yeah, I mean, not all his pieces, because he has some pieces on a different point of view, but most of his pieces are really, like I said, algorithms that go from the beginning to the end, or at least that are presented like this, and which again, the piece is the algorithm somehow. I mean, but you know, about contemporary or not contemporary music, those people, ex-colleagues of mine, I heard once one of them saying, you know, Bach, or maybe it was Mozart. No, I think Bach was a very great mathematician. No, he was not a mathematician. I mean, he did something with possibly some math in it, but first of all, he didn't want to use that people consider this as mathematics. I'm sure of that. And second, okay, so what? I mean, come on, the mathematics he was using are really elementary. So you see what I mean.
Yeah, so from the combinatorial point of view, it's very skillful, very intelligent, but he also expresses emotions. So that's not just mathematics.
Yeah, but is it because of mathematics that it gives emotion, or is that sort of unrelated? First question, and second question: what kind of emotion is it? Is it what I call the artistic emotion, so something that comes from the heart or from the guts, or is it some sort of aesthetic beauty, aesthetic whatever? That okay, I recognize that there is a palindrome, and I'm very content that I found the palindrome. You see what I mean? And I think they have the 2 points of view, and mathematics is more towards the second point. That's my opinion. I mean, I'm not.
But do you think that so the use of, I mean, counterpoint techniques, for example, so that automatically beautiful in some way, or automatically expresses some, or expresses some feelings?
That's a good question. The question would be, what if you don't know anything about the rules behind? Are you going to feel the same expression? It's what I said about previous knowledge, previous corpus of knowledge. Again, if you see a piece of African art and you don't know anything about African art or about African culture or whatever, then you might feel a fantastic emotion suddenly, and you don't understand anything. And are we sure that it's going to be the same for counterpoint, or do we have somehow, because of we learned that or we heard that before, some sort of idea of this is the way of it works, and so on and so forth? Actually, the same could be said for the scales. Of course, there is an very interesting theory of a mathematical theory behind the scales. But are the scales that natural? For example, in India, some music divide an octave in, if I forgot, in 100 subdivisions instead of 7. So what is natural and what is automatic, as you said, what comes necessarily with? And this is a question. I'm not claiming I answer this question, but at least I want to ask it and say, okay, be cautious. Maybe it's different.
Yeah, it depends very much on the culture.
Yeah. Yes and yeah. Yes and no. Again, yeah, you're right in the sense that we are sort of emerge in some culture since and of course we react in function of that. But again, if you take something from a different culture that you have no idea about, and if you feel still an emotion, what does it mean? You cannot say that because you are culturally exposed to that. At least it is what I think. And this is the whole point. You know, for example, another example of emotion is it never happened to me that I weep by listening to that cry when I listen to mathematical proof. Okay, yeah, oh, this is nice. Oh, wow. But that's it. And comparatively, if you listen to a piece for your culture or possibly for another culture, you may have some sort of emotion and you can even cry. So, I don't know. I mean, somebody told me at some point, yes, for music it's different because music comes before the language, before the articulated language. And so it's sort of much before in the brain, so to say, I mean, in the formation of the brain or whatever. And that might be the reason why it has a direct influence. I'm not sure I explained it good enough. But okay, there is something behind. But on the other hand, I agree that, of course, culture plays a role. Of course, mathematics do play a role, but of course, metallurgy also. I mean, a lot of fields play a role, even if we are not aware of them. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I think there's still a lot of research to be done to understand
absolutely.
really why a melody sounds beautiful, for example.
Absolutely. I give you to give you a stupid example. I mean, here we learn that, you know, major scale and minor scale. One is when you are happy, and the other one is when you are sad. And it's totally false. I mean, totally wrong. I mean, you can have very sad pieces in major scales and very joyful pieces in minor scales. But, you know, there's some sort of cliches like this, which we should be aware of and cautious about. Yeah.
But generally, minor sounds more, I mean, to the European ears, it sounds more sad. Major sounds more happy. So
is it true?
For some reason.
Is it really true? I'm sure I can find counterexamples. I found counterexamples to that. But I mean, generally, maybe you're right. I mean, on average, yeah, you're right. On average, probably. But yeah, okay, it's not It's not a strict rule, so to say. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, sorry that I couldn't be present physically, which is certainly better.
We'll be in touch with you. I may disturb you sometime writing some questions.
Certainly.
Yeah. And,
Yes, please.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.